The air was warm that afternoon, the kind of suburban stillness that feels almost staged until it breaks with the sound of laughter Emma's, laughter bright and unrestrained floating over the trimmed hedges and white fences. She was chasing our dog Scout across the small patch of grass, barefoot, her hair a wild halo. In the sunlight, the smell of cut grass mixed with the faint sweetness of the flowers she insisted on planting last spring. Then the laughter stopped, replaced by a scream sharp and electric. My body moved before my mind caught up. I ran out the door and saw her on the ground, trembling, clutching her arm. The pink flash of a taser, still crackling in the hand of our neighbor Karen Jennings, froze me in place for a second before fury took over. She stood there unmoved, chin high, eyes narrowed with the satisfaction of a petty god enforcing her own laws. She said the words slow and deliberate, like she'd rehearsed them. You call that noise play. She's disturbing the peace. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't even speak at first. I dropped beside Emma. She was crying, gasping the smell of burnt ozone, clinging to her skin. Kerren had actually tossed her. My voice came out raw. You toss my daughter, you psycho. Kerren flinched at the volume, but not at the meaning. She muttered something about self-defense, that Emma had charged at her. That was a lie. My daughter could barely lift her head. The neighbors peeked from behind their curtain, silent. Witnesses to madness. The world went quiet except for Emma's shaky breaths. That was the moment something in me broke. It hadn't always been like this. A week earlier, I'd still believed in peace and rules and the quiet promise of this neighborhood. I'd moved here because I thought it was safe, a good place for a child to grow without sirens, without shouting, without fear. I wanted simple things, a garden, a porch, a chance for Emma to laugh, without worrying. Who heard her? Karen was the first to welcome us. She brought a pie to the door, her smile stretched too wide, her questions too sharp. Where do you work? How long do you plan to stay? Do you keep your lawn tidy? I should have known then that her kindness was just an inspection disguised as courtesy. She was a vice president of the HOA, the self-appointed guardian of community standards. She had power, and she wielded it like a weapon. The first complaint came when Emma drew chalk flowers on the sidewalk. Karen said it lowered property value. The second, when Emma practiced her violin by the window. She called it noise pollution and dropped a printed warning letter in our mailbox. The third came when we had the audacity to host a small cookout on a Saturday. She showed up in her pressed khaki shorts, waving a clipboard, shouting about noise ordinances and curfews. I told her find a hobby that didn't involve terrorizing children. She glared at me like I committed a crime and hissed, "You'll regret disrespecting the HOA." I laughed then. I don't laugh much now. The days after the cookout were uneasy. Every time I stepped outside, I felt her eyes from across the street. I caught her taking photos of our lawn at dawn, measuring shadows by our fence, like she was searching for flaws. The neighbors avoided me. Some whispered that she'd gone after them too. But no one wanted to be her next target. Karen had power, not real power, but the kind that made people nervous. Fines, citations, threats of legal action. She turned our quiet neighborhood into her own little dictatorship. That morning I told Emma to stay close to home. She was outside, blowing bubbles, her laughter carrying on the breeze. Scout chasing the shimmering orbs. She looked so happy that for a moment I forgot about Karen. Then I saw her from the corner of my eye, marching across the lawn in her pastel sweater, clutching her phone, recording like a reporter at a crime scene. Her voice was shrill. "You've been warned about excessive noise. This is your last notice." Emma froze, bubbles drifting between them. I stepped onto the porch to intervene, but it happened too fast. Karen's hand went into her pocket. She pulled out that pink taser, pressed a button, and a flash of blue light split the air. Emma screamed and collapsed. Time slowed. I heard Scout bark. I heard my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I remember the metallic taste of rage flooding my mouth as I ran to her, the smell of ozone, the small trembling hand clutching at my arm. I looked up at Karen and saw no remorse, no fear, just cold justification. She said it calmly. She was resisting an HOA warning. I defended myself. I wanted to break something. I wanted to shake the truth out of her, but all I could do was hold Emma, whispering that it would be okay, even as I knew nothing about this was okay. The neighbors watched through glass, their faces pale, but none of them came outside. No one wanted to cross her. I could see their phones recording, though the cowardly kind of help that hides behind curtains. Karen stood her ground, still breathing hard, as if she were the victim. She said, "You people think you can do whatever you want around here, but we have rules." I stood up, every muscle in my body shaking from adrenaline. I didn't shout this time. My voice came out. "Quiet, too quiet. You hurt my daughter." I will never forget this. She blinked, her eyes flickered, but she didn't apologize. She turned and walked away, leaving the faint smell of burned air and the echo of my daughter's sobs behind her. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. every time lightning flashed through her window. She flinched or laughed at the thing I loved most about this house was gone. The walls that once felt like safety now held the memory of her scream. I sat beside her bed, watching the shadows move on the ceiling, listening to the rain tapping like slow applause on the roof. I thought about calling police, but the thought of explaining this to people who might shrug it off as a neighborhood dispute made my stomach twist. I didn't know then how deep Karen's reach went, but I could feel it already the next morning when I stepped outside and saw the small burn mark on the grass. Where Emma had fallen, something inside me hardened. There are moments in life when anger turns into clarity, when fear burns away and leaves purpose that was mine. I looked at the tidy houses around us, at the neighbors pretending nothing happened, at the perfect silence Karen fought so hard to protect. And I made a silent promise. I didn't know how, but I would make her pay, not in secret, not in whispers, but where everyone could see. That day I stopped being polite. I stopped being scared. I became a parent protecting what's mine. And though I didn't know it, yet the war had already begun. The next morning began with silence, so heavy it felt deliberate, the kind of quiet that hides judgment behind blinds. Emma moved slower than usual, her laughter replaced by careful breaths. She wouldn't step outside, not even to feed Scout. She flinched when the wind rustled the trees. I tried to smile, to act normal, but rage pulsed beneath every word. I spoke the world, kept going while mine had split open. 2 police officers came that afternoon. Their cruiser lights flickered across the driveway, casting cold colors over the lawn. They took statements. Karen stood across the street, arms folded, a picture of smug innocence. She said she had acted in self-defense, that my daughter had lunged at her. They wrote notes, nodded, and told me they'd file a report. But their eyes told me the truth. Nothing would happen. They left without even taking the taser. Emma sat on the couch holding a blanket to her chest, asking questions. I couldn't answer. Why would she do that? Did I do something wrong? I told her no, but the words tasted like dust. The truth was crueler. She had done nothing wrong. She was just unlucky enough to be in the path of someone drunk on control. That evening, an email from the HOA arrived. The subject line read, "Notice of potential violation." The message accused me of spreading false information about a board member. It warned of legal consequences if I continued defamation. I stared at the screen long enough for my anger to settle into something sharper, colder. I realized Karen wasn't just one cruel neighbor. She was a system. She had friends on that board, people who feared or benefited from her power. I couldn't fight her with shouting. I needed proof. The next HOA meeting was held in the community hall, the same room used for birthday parties and bake sales. But that night it felt like a courtroom. Karen sat at the front, flanked by the president and treasurer, smiling her politician smile. I stood in the center of the room, explaining what happened, showing them the small red mark still visible on Emma's arm. Some looked uncomfortable, others skeptical when I mentioned the taser. Karen interrupted, claiming she'd used a flashlight for self-protection. The room laughed, not kindly, but nervously. I demanded she be removed from her position. The president cleared his throat, said the board would review the matter. I knew what that meant. Nothing. When the meeting ended, she approached me, her perfume sharp, her voice low. "You really should let this go. People might start thinking you're unstable." I wanted to hit her, but I didn't. I just looked her in the eye and said, "One day, everyone will see you for what you are." She smiled and said, "Good luck with that." Days blurred together. The HOA sent more warnings. Small fines appeared in my mailbox for imaginary violations, untrimmed bushes, unauthorized decorations, unpaid dues. It was punishment disguised as procedure. The neighbors started avoiding me. Some stopped waving. Others looked away entirely. I could see fear in their eyes, the kind that made good people quiet. I stayed up late scrolling through local forums, reading posts about HOA abuse, people telling stories of corruption, intimidation, fines that turned into threats. I saw her name mentioned once in a thread about embezzlement, but it was old and proven. I started saving screenshots. I set up cameras around the house, not just for safety, but for evidence. One night, while checking the footage, I saw something that froze me. Karen walking up our driveway past midnight, placing an envelope on the porch. She didn't see the camera. I waited until morning before opening it. Inside was another fine, this one handwritten, "Unauthorized recording devices within neighborhood limits." It was laughable, but it told me something. She knew I was watching her. She was afraid. That fear was the crack I needed. I started digging through HOA public records, bank statements available to members, expense reports, budgets. It didn't take long before the pattern appeared. Purchases that made no sense, high-ticket electronics, jewelry, personal gadgets, all listed under community safety equipment, including one labeled self-defense device, pink portable. I stared at that line until my vision blurred. That taser wasn't even hers. It was bought with HOA money. I didn't sleep that night. I edited the footage, compiled documents, created folders labeled by date and topic. Each click steadied me. Each file was a piece of her mask coming apart. I titled the main folder Operation Kerren. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about exposure. When I told Emma what I was doing, she didn't say much. She just nodded and asked softly, will it make her stop? I told her yes, though I wasn't sure. I just knew I had to try. The next step was proof that people would believe. I posted a short video online, a calm narration over blurred images explaining that an HOA officer had used a taser on a child over a noise complaint. I didn't name her yet. I just told the story. The internet did the rest. The comments came fast. Outrage, sympathy, curiosity. Someone recognized the street. Another said they lived under a similar HOA nightmare. Within hours, it had thousands of views. By nightfall, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers. Karen must have seen it too, because her car headlights flashed across my window just before midnight. She sat there for a long time, engine idling. Before driving off, I knew it was coming, but I didn't care anymore. The fear was gone, replaced by something fiercer. The next morning, I woke to dozens of messages, people offering to share stories, neighbors sending screenshots of emails Karen had sent them years ago, threats of fines over kids' toys left outside lawns an inch too tall. One even claimed she demanded they repaint their house twice in a year because the shade wasn't community approved. Every story was another nail in her perfect fence. The video kept spreading. Local bloggers picked it up. Someone identified her name in the comments. The momentum was building faster than I expected. I should have been nervous, but I wasn't. I felt alive for the first time in weeks. That evening, Emma stood at the window watching the sunset. She asked if we were in trouble. I told her maybe for now, but not for long. She nodded and smiled, a small, real smile, the first one since that day. It was enough to keep me going. When the sun went down, I walked outside and stood on the porch. The air smelled like rain again, the same way it had the day. Everything fell apart, but now it felt like a warning bell before the storm. Not the end of one. I looked at her house across the street, dark. Except for a faint blue light from a window, I knew she was watching, and I wanted her to see me calm, steady, unbroken. She had no idea what was coming. And I wanted her to wonder. I wanted her to feel the same unease she had fed everyone else, because soon her perfect little kingdom would start to crumble, and this time everyone would be watching. The morning she came storming to my door, the air felt charged like the sky before a lightning strike. Her car screeched to a halt, and she stepped out in her pastel sweater and pearl earrings. Her face, twisted with rage, the neighborhood was already awake, drawn by the sound of her shouting. She waved her phone in the air and yelled, "You think you can slander me? You think a few videos will ruin me? I'll have your house, your job, your whole life." I opened the door slowly, not afraid, just tired. She looked smaller than I remembered, not in height, but in presence. Like the power she wore, it started to slip off her shoulders. People began to gather across the street, whispering, filming. Some of the same neighbors who had once hidden behind their curtains now stood in the open, watching, waiting. Karen's voice grew shrill. "You don't understand who you're dealing with. I built this community. I made it safe. I'll destroy you before you destroy me." She jabbed a finger toward me, trembling with fury. I stepped forward until the distance between us felt dangerous, but I kept my tone steady. "You hurt my daughter. You stole from every family here. You think fear is control, but it's not. It's rot." For a moment, her eyes flickered, and I saw something almost human, a flash of uncertainty. Then it vanished, replaced by raw arrogance. She lunged forward, trying to snatch my phone out of my hand. I didn't think I reacted. My hand moved before reason did, and the sound that followed cracked the silence like thunder, a single slap echoing across the street. It wasn't hard enough to harm, but enough to stop her cold. Her head turned slightly, hair falling across her cheek. The crowd gasped, phones rising higher. Karen froze, eyes wide in disbelief, not used to being touched, not used to being defied. The world held its breath. I stared at her, waiting for the explosion. Instead, she stumbled backward, her voice breaking into a high, thin wail. "You hit me. You assaulted me. I'm calling police." "I already did," I said, quietly holding up my phone. "I told them you were here. They'll want to see your taser, too." Her face drained of color. She turned to look at the gathering crowd, their expressions no longer fearful, but curious and cold. They had seen everything. The sirens arrived faster than I expected. 2 patrol cars pulled up, officers stepping out calm, but alert. Karen rushed toward them, tears streaking her face, shouting accusations, pointing at me, at my house, at the cameras. The officers listened, then turned to me. I showed them the recordings, the documents, the footage of her holding the taser, her own emails admitting the fine she had invented for personal gain. They took the phone from her hand, examined the device, and exchanged a look I could see. The moment the realization hit her, she tried to speak, but the words tangled into noise. The neighbors began to talk loudly now, the fear broken like a chain. One man shouted about the fine she gave for his fence. Another woman said she'd been threatened for hosting a birthday party. They all started speaking at once, the stories pouring out faster than she could deny them. It was chaos. But it was truth finally free. The officers told her she was under investigation for assault and misuse of HOA funds. Her knees weakened, and she looked at me, eyes wide, desperate, as if begging for mercy. I didn't feel hatred anymore, only an empty finality. They placed her in the back of the cruiser. She kept shouting that this was harassment, that she was innocent, but her voice cracked under the weight of reality. The car door closed with a heavy final sound. The crowd cheered, quietly, not loud enough for mockery, but enough for relief. A storm had broken, and the air felt cleaner. Emma stood behind me. She must have come outside during the commotion. Her eyes were wide, but not frightened. She watched the car drive away, then looked up at me, her voice small but certain. Is it over? I nodded. Not yet, but it will be soon. She smiled, faintly, the kind of smile that carries the first hint of healing. That night the videos exploded online. The full compilation I had prepared spread faster than I imagined. News outlets picked it up, headlines flashing across screens. HOA Vice President Tase's child over noise complaint. Local community exposes corruption. The comments poured in, thousands of strangers defending Emma, demanding justice for families like ours. Karen's name became a symbol of everything wrong with power abused. In the following days, the board resigned one by one. The president called me personally, his voice trembling, apologizing, saying he never knew how far she'd gone. I didn't believe him, but I accepted. The neighborhood changed quickly. People waved again. Children played outside. Without fear, laughter returned, hesitant at first, then strong. A week later, the police confirmed formal charges: assault, misuse of funds, falsified documents. The taser was identified as property bought with HOA money. Her reputation shattered, her influence gone. She moved out quietly at night. Someone said she went to stay with her sister 2 towns away. I didn't care where she went, only that she was gone. On the evening after her departure, I sat on the porch with Emma. The sky was gold, fading into violet. She held her violin on her lap, hesitant fingers tracing the strings. I told her to play something, anything. She smiled and began to play a soft tune that rose gently into the air. The notes floated over the street, warm and clear. Neighbors stepped out, listening. No one complained. Not a single voice interrupted. The music felt like cleansing, like a curse lifting. As she played, I thought about the slap, the sound that had ended one life and started another. It wasn't pride I felt, but peace, the kind that comes when balance is restored. I realized that justice doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it's just truth finding its way into the light. When the final note faded, Emma leaned against my shoulder and whispered, "She can't stop the noise anymore." I smiled and said no. She can't. The laughter that followed wasn't loud or wild, just steady and real, and that was enough. Across the street, her old house sat, dark windows shuttered, the garden already growing wild. Without her constant control, the place looked almost human again. I watched the wind stir the uncut grass and felt something close to gratitude, not for her, but for what her cruelty had taught me. Power without empathy rots everything it touches, but courage, even quiet courage, restores it. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing in the quiet, the kind of quiet that wasn't forced or fearful, but earned. The neighborhood lights glowed softly. Children's voices echoed faintly in the distance. The world felt right again. I opened my eyes, looked at Emma, and said, "Let's go inside." She nodded, carrying her violin close like something sacred. As the door closed behind us, I glanced once more toward the street, imagining her somewhere, watching, still fuming, still certain she'd been wronged. But it didn't matter anymore. She had built her throne on fear, and I had torn it down with truth and one undeniable sound, a single sharp reminder that her reign was over and ours had just begun.